What's happening, YouTube? What's up? So Dan Marino a few months ago said that if he had been drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers in that great 1983 class of Jim Kelly and John Elway, if he'd have been drafted by Steelers, being a homegrown kid from Pitt, he'd won a couple Super Bowls with the Steelers based on that defense. What do I think about that? Well, as you know, I do my research. As you know, I had to crunch up the numbers and look at everything. I don't like to do that all in front of you because I have to do that behind the scenes because that's a lot of work. All I like to do is give you the end results because if I'm doing a 4 or 5 minute video, maybe sometimes longer, depends if I like the subject matter, how it goes. I just add the extras. Well, I did my research on it, and also half of it was my memory, if you must know. I had to do the research for their wins and losses because let's be realistic. After they won that last Super Bowl against the Rams, I want to say that was 80, 79, 80. They won that last Super Bowl against the Rams. And then I think that following year, the Raiders beat the Eagles, and then the 49ers beat the Bengals. Yeah. Anyway, when Mean Joe Green was trying to say one for the thumb, it never came to be. The 80s saw them be very mediocre. They were 70, I don't want to say 79, 77 for 10 years for that window. Franco Harris ended up going to Seattle. Many of their guys retired. Rocky Blyer did. Bradshaw, he went out pretty bad actually. So that still occurred, and they got old, and they went on, and they didn't have what you call replacements. They had good parts because they were still a 500 ball club. But when I hear what Dan Marino is saying, I have to concur because they were stuck with Cliff Stout and Mark Malone. And those two turkeys couldn't carry the curls in Dan Marino's head. If you remember, Mark Malone had some cushy gig with ESPN. They used to hire bums and busters to give critiques on football. Mark Malone seemed like a decent dude. He would have been a nice body double for Tom Selleck with the mustache. But at the quarterback position coming behind Terry Bradshaw, no dice. He was a clown. And they had Merle Hodge, who hard-working cat, but come on. He had an out-of-body game or two, but there was not, those 70s era Steelers were long gone. Now, Frank Pollard, who I remember, and Sidney Thornton was the running backs. I remember that, you know. They still carried a power lunch pail thing with the attack on the ground, but it wasn't the same. The line, it wasn't the same no more. And Lewis Lips, who I remember as the wide receiver, he was kind of big, second tier receiver for his time. Did pretty good. Got the two Pro Bowls back when the Pro Bowls mattered. You talk about that make a difference. They were, I think, 77, 75. I want to say it was like 80 through 89. So Chuck Noll was still there. They were not, they had some down years, but they still were competitive to be average, which, again, that got them over, for what they were doing. But compared to what they had done in their 70s reign, no, they were a far cry removed. So do I think he had any, could it have happened? Yeah, give or take, because they were an average team. So if you get a top tier talent like a Marino to quarterback them, perhaps, 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 you know, perhaps it does go that way. Perhaps it is just like that, you know, because when you look at it in totality, they were missing that kind of dynamic. But I know one saw him in college going to turn into the pros to what he became. So that's probably why Chuck Noll was reluctant. And he figured that he had a lunch pail cat, and that's what he settled for, but it didn't work. And it wasn't, you'd have to go a whole nother 20 years before you got a Ben Roethlisberger. Wouldn't that have been something, though? Marino had a played in Pittsburgh, and then the debate out of him and Roethlisberger. Because we're talking purely quarterback, and Bradshaw won a lot of rings, but Bradshaw was no Dan Marino, and he was no Ben Roethlisberger. He was successful, but those guys were another level. So that would have been an interesting argument, especially if Marino goes to Pittsburgh and had won a ring or two. Who would have been seen as the end all out of that? But we'll never know. But anyway, please let me know what your thoughts and your takes. Please hit like, subscribe, welcome thoughts, comments, and I do respond. Thank you. Wash your hands. Keep your mind clear. Watch out for another shit if you'd like and hit that membership, because when you do, requests like this come true. Stay safe, stay blessed, stay woke, stay free, stay tuned. I'm out. Peace.